The story of Ferdinand VII of Spain is one of the most bizarre and unsettling tales in the history of European monarchies, and for good reason. Often referred to by historians as the most perverted king in history, Ferdinand VII remains a figure shrouded in both disgust and fascination. When we examine his reign, his personality, and the peculiar indulgences that defined his private life, we uncover a ruler who combined incompetence, cruelty, and depravity in equal measure. Unlike other monarchs who left behind legacies of military conquests, architectural wonders, or sweeping reforms, Ferdinand's legacy was one of degradation, eccentricity, and destructive self-interest. To begin with, Ferdinand VII came to power in an era of deep crisis for Spain. The Napoleonic Wars had left the nation in turmoil, its institutions weakened, and its people divided between liberal reformers and conservative absolutists. Ferdinand initially appeared as a figure of hope, hailed as the desired one by those who saw him as a savior who could restore order and dignity to the throne after the chaos of Napoleon's intervention. Yet what followed was a reign that quickly turned the hopes of his people into bitter disillusionment. Instead of offering stability, Ferdinand reveled in paranoia, repression, and a lifestyle that revealed more about his disturbing inner world than any sense of statesmanship. When people talk about Ferdinand VII as the most perverted king, they are not simply referring to gossip or the kinds of excesses often attributed to royalty. This was a man whose private life and appetites bordered on the grotesque. After returning to the throne in 1814, he systematically rolled back the liberal reforms that had been introduced during the Spanish Constitution of 1812. He restored absolute monarchy, censoring the press, imprisoning dissenters, and clamping down on the intellectual spirit that had begun to take root in Spain. At the same time, his personal life descended into a carnival of sexual perversity and political manipulation, giving him a reputation far darker than any of his predecessors. Contemporaries and later historians describe Ferdinand's body as frail, almost deformed, and his face marked by a slack-jawed expression that betrayed both physical weakness and an unsettling absence of self-control. He was obsessed with physical indulgence, particularly in matters of sex, but was equally incapable of producing an heir for much of his life, leading to endless scandals about impotence, infertility, and grotesque medical interventions. It is reported that Ferdinand commissioned erotic manuals, grotesque objects, and even paintings that revealed his unnatural obsessions. Some accounts suggest that he engaged in bizarre sexual rituals and fixations that left even his close courtiers shocked. The reputation he cultivated was not of a powerful lover but rather of a grotesque monarch whose perversions became the talk of Europe. One of the most notorious aspects of Ferdinand's private life was the so-called Book of Instructions that he allegedly left behind. This was a detailed manual filled with pornographic descriptions and bizarre sexual advice for his young queen, Isabella II, when she was still a child. The idea that a monarch would commission such a disturbing document for his daughter not only scandalized his contemporaries but also cemented his reputation as the most perverted king in modern European history. This obsession with controlling the sexual education of others, combined with his own indulgences, paints a portrait of a man consumed by demons. In terms of governance, Ferdinand's reign was disastrous. He reversed progress at every opportunity, preferring to strengthen his own authority rather than pursue reforms that could modernize Spain. His decisions plunged the country into repeated crises, including the loss of Spain's vast American colonies, while revolutions swept through Latin America. Driven by figures such as Andy San, Ferdinand stubbornly clung to outdated notions of empire and absolutism. His inability to adapt or compromise led directly to Spain's collapse as a global power. Yet, in parallel with these failures, Ferdinand maintained a court filled with indulgence and decadence. He surrounded himself with sycophants, enablers, and courtiers who encouraged his grotesque habits while the people of Spain suffered under poverty, famine, and political instability. His priorities were not to rebuild Spain's shattered economy or restore its dignity, but rather to indulge his obsessions. Historians note that Ferdinand's court was often filled with pornographic objects, paintings, and decorations, turning the royal palace into a grotesque parody of monarchy rather than a symbol of leadership. For many Spaniards, Ferdinand's reign became a nightmare not only because of his personal behavior, but also because of the consequences of his political decisions. His repression of liberal ideas sparked repeated revolts, forcing the country into cycles of uprising and crackdown. At one point, he was even restored to power by the intervention of foreign troops, demonstrating how little his authority truly rested on the support of his own people. Despite this weakness, he clung obsessively to absolute power, refusing to compromise or introduce reforms that might have saved the monarchy from further decline. From a psychological perspective, Ferdinand VII's life offers a disturbing case study in how absolute power can warp the human personality. Isolated within the palace, indulged by courtiers, and shielded from the consequences of his actions, Ferdinand developed into a monarch who treated the kingdom as his personal playground. His obsessions with sex, control, and indulgence reflected not just personal perversions but also a system of governance that enabled such behavior to flourish unchecked. In this sense, Ferdinand represents the darker side of monarchy. The possibility that a single individual's depravity can shape the destiny of an entire nation. The peculiar detail of Ferdinand's obsession with producing an heir also deserves attention. For much of his reign, he failed to produce children, leading to speculation about his impotence. Yet, in his later years, he married Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies, who finally bore him daughters. This gave rise to one of the most contentious episodes in Spanish history, the Carlist Wars. Ferdinand altered the succession laws to allow his daughter, Isabella II, to inherit the throne, angering supporters of his brother, Don Carlos, who believed he was the rightful heir. This dispute triggered a brutal civil conflict that tore Spain apart for decades, all rooted in Ferdinand's desperate obsession with his own lineage and his grotesque manipulation of succession laws. Even in death, Ferdinand's legacy was tainted by the reputation he had built. Unlike other monarchs who were remembered for their military triumphs or cultural achievements, Ferdinand was remembered as the grotesque king, the perverted monarch whose personal life overshadowed every aspect of his rule. His very body, deformed and ravaged by years of indulgence, became a symbol of Spain's decay under his leadership. To understand Ferdinand VII in comparison to other rulers, we might look at figures like Nero in Rome or Caligula, who are remembered for their sexual deviance and cruelty. Yet Ferdinand occupies a unique place because his depravity unfolded within a more modern context, one where newspapers, diplomats, and political discourse made his reputation widely known across Europe. He was not an ancient tyrant whose excesses were passed down through rumor, but a contemporary monarch whose grotesque lifestyle shocked the courts of Europe and shaped diplomatic perceptions of Spain. There is also a peculiar irony in how Ferdinand VII's reign continues to capture fascination today. While Spain lost its empire and endured civil strife as a direct result of his failures, popular history remembers him most vividly for his perversity. The very scandals that horrified his contemporaries now serve as the primary lens through which modern audiences engage with his reign. Documentaries, books, and articles continue to highlight his bizarre obsessions, his pornographic collections, and his grotesque book of instructions as the defining features of his life. When we strip away the layers of gossip and scandal, what remains is a portrait of a deeply insecure and incompetent ruler. His obsession with sex and control can be seen as a desperate attempt to assert power in a life where he otherwise felt powerless. His frail body, his inability to command respect, and his constant reliance on foreign intervention left him with little to admire in terms of leadership. What he could control was his immediate surroundings, his court, his wives, his collections of grotesque objects, and he indulged in these with an obsession that consumed him. In the broader narrative of European history, Ferdinand VII stands as a cautionary tale. He represents the dangers of absolute power when combined with personal weakness and depravity. Unlike reformist monarchs who guided their nations through modernization, Ferdinand clung to outdated absolutism, dragging Spain into decline. Unlike rulers who at least balanced their personal vices with public achievements, Ferdinand left behind nothing but shame and scandal. His reign was not just a failure for Spain, but also a personal failure as a human being. Even today, the fascination with Ferdinand VII reminds us of the enduring human curiosity about the extremes of power and perversion. The story of a king who indulged in grotesque obsessions, while his nation collapsed, speaks not only to the failings of one man, but also to the fragility of institutions that allow such men to rule unchecked. Spain in the 19th century became a tragic stage for this drama, and the scars of Ferdinand's reign, political, cultural, and psychological, lasted long after his death.